Hello, PAHO colleague. I'm Paulo Lira with the Department of Communication. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming Jessie Schut-Ene. She is the Chief of the Gender Unit and Cultural Diversity Unit in PAHO. Hello, Jessie. How are you?
Hello. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Jessie, for being with us today. Jessie, tell me, in our generation, we saw incredible advances in this area of gender equity and diversity, mostly good advances. Why do we need yet another publication on this topic, and this one focusing on COVID-19 vaccination?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. I think so much has changed, right? We see that we are recovering from the pandemic, and so many things have changed. And we saw during the pandemic that the equity issue was really exacerbated with certain communities, Afro-descendants, Indigenous, women, really feeling the brunt of COVID a lot more than other communities. And so we thought it was important, and also in response to countries who were asking us about how can we communicate better. We're trying to reach those who are being left behind and really get at the communities that are being left behind. So, communication is so important to reaching those communities, and we need to make sure that we communicate to them in a way that they feel that they're being spoken to.
That's very interesting, that we still have many challenges in this area, particularly in communication. So can you give some practical examples of what you're recommending in this publication?
Right. I think as a premise, we need to understand that if I'm not reflected in the communication materials, I feel like you're not talking to me. So I think it's important that we are inclusive in our communications, and that we are targeting the communities that we want to reach. And so the guide is really meant to be a practical guideline, and that's what we heard really strongly from countries. We need something practical tools. We have, and it's divided into 4 sections. And the first contains, a number of ideas on what do we mean by inclusive language. And the second part has 10 key points on using inclusive and culturally diverse audio materials. And so you've got, very practical guidance there. And then the third section has a checklist. And within that, we have a list of do's and don'ts. What is recommended and what do we normally see, and how can we improve it? So I think that we'll find that it's a really useful guide, and we invite you to use it and to give us feedback and to give us stories about how it's being used in the countries. We have a lot of Indigenous people. There's 60 million Indigenous people in the Americas, and people of African descent make up close to 30% of the total population. So when we're doing our communication materials, we need to make sure that we're inclusive of the different communities that we're trying to reach.
Jessie, I understand that in this case, and maybe one of the few cases where the English version and the Spanish version of the publication is going to be a bit different, because gender is particularly challenged in Spanish, because Spanish is not a gender neutral language. So right now we are launching the Spanish version. Are we going to launch the English version too?
Yes, we are currently working on the English version, and that's a great question. We have issues of masculine, feminine, and Spanish that don't necessarily exist in English, and so we are reworking it a little bit. We did have the participation of countries that gave us feedback on the tools. So for the Spanish version, we had Cuba and a couple of other countries. For the English version, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to reach out to the countries to make sure that we get the feedback and that we have a consultative process so that we're really responding to some of the communication issues that we might find in countries.
So colleagues, I encourage all of you of checking this publication. There is a link below us here. And thank you so much for watching us today. And thank you, Jessie, for being with us today too.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of those who participated in the communication guideline. Thank you so much.